The last thing my father ever said before walking out of my coffee shop was, "You'll be begging us for money before Christmas." 2 years later, he stood outside that same little cafe for nearly an hour, hoping I'd save his business from bankruptcy. I looked him straight in the eyes, and for the first time in my life, I simply smiled and said, "No." Before I tell you how my own family turned my dream into a joke, and how that joke became the most famous coffee shop in town, take a second to like the video and subscribe if you enjoy stories where karma takes its time, but never misses. Now let me tell you exactly how it happened. My name is Erica Sullivan. I'm 31 years old, and for most of my life, my family treated me like I was the disappointment they were too embarrassed to admit they had. Not because I was irresponsible, not because I made bad choices, but because my dream wasn't impressive enough. My father, Richard Sullivan, believed success came with glass office buildings, expensive suits, and job titles that sounded important at dinner parties. My mother agreed with him. My younger brother, Kyle, copied everything Dad believed. According to them, there were only two kinds of people: those who became somebody, and everyone else. Unfortunately for me, I fell into the second category. Ever since I was a little girl, I loved coffee. Not drinking it. Everything around it. The smell of freshly ground beans. The quiet conversations people had over warm mugs. The way cafes became tiny shelters where complete strangers forgot about the outside world for an hour. While other kids dreamed about becoming doctors or lawyers, I dreamed about owning a place where people felt safe. Dad called it playing waitress. Every single time. You don't build a future pouring coffee. I heard those words so many times they became background noise. Still, I never stopped believing. After college, I worked everywhere: bookstores, small cafes, bakeries, a local roastery. I learned everything: inventory, roasting, accounting, customer service, maintenance, marketing. I wasn't making much money, but every paycheck had a purpose. Savings. Slowly. Painfully. Over nearly 8 years. I saved enough for a down payment on a tiny storefront that everyone else overlooked. It wasn't in the busiest part of town. It wasn't fancy. The windows were old. The floor squeaked. The plumbing complained every morning. But when sunlight poured through the front windows, I could see it. I could already imagine people laughing there, reading, working, falling in love, celebrating birthdays, finding comfort after terrible days. It felt alive before I even bought it. I named it Morning Ember because every day deserved a warm beginning. When I signed the papers, I cried in my car. Not because I was scared, because I'd finally done it. I called my parents. Dad answered. I bought the building. Silence. What building? My cafe. Another pause. Then laughter. Actual laughter. So you really did it? I did. You spent your savings on a coffee shop? Yes. More laughter. I honestly thought you'd grow out of this phase. That sentence hurt more than I expected. Not because he disagreed, because he genuinely believed my biggest dream was childish. Mom took the phone. Oh, honey. Whenever she started with those words, disappointment always followed. Wouldn't it be smarter to buy a condo? I wanted this. But coffee shops fail. I know. What if nobody comes? I'll figure it out. She sighed. You've always been stubborn. No congratulations, no excitement, nothing. Just concern wrapped in judgment. Then came Kyle. He called me an hour later. I heard you're opening a tiny cafe. I am. Dad says you'll last 6 months. I'm not asking, Dad. Kyle laughed. You should have invested in crypto instead. I don't know anything about crypto. You also don't know business. Click. That was the conversation. Opening day arrived 3 months later. I invited everyone: Parents, brother, aunts, uncles, cousins. I even mailed handwritten invitations. Not because I wanted gifts. I wanted support. Family. Just once. Opening morning arrived. Fresh cinnamon rolls filled the air. The espresso machine hummed. Soft jazz played through the speakers. The first sunlight spilled across the wooden tables exactly like I'd imagined years before. I wore the green apron I'd embroidered myself. My hands shook so badly I almost dropped the first coffee cup. At 8 o'clock, the first customer walked in. A retired teacher named Mrs. Bennett. I've been waiting weeks for this place to open. I smiled so hard my cheeks hurt. Then another customer came. Then another. Then 5. Business wasn't overwhelming, but people stayed. They smiled. They came back later with friends. By noon I thought, maybe this could actually work. Then my family arrived. All at once. 8 of them. Dad walked in first, looking around as if inspecting a motel room. So this is it. I smiled anyway. It is. Kyle whispered loudly enough for everyone to hear. I've seen bigger gas station cafes. The family laughed. Every single one. Mom touched one of my handmade shelves. Did you build these yourself? I did. They look homemade. They are. Oh. That tone. The one that meant she hated them. Customers noticed. I noticed them noticing. My aunt asked where the wine list was. My uncle asked why the chairs didn't match. Kyle filmed the room on his phone. Guys, come support Erica's little hobby business. Hobby. Not business, hobby. They ordered drinks. Complicated drinks. Extra hot, extra cold. Remade twice. Then, they asked if family got everything free. Dad actually looked offended when I said no. We're your parents. And this is my business. So? I can't afford to give everything away. He shook his head. See? He looked at everyone. She's already thinking like she's running Starbucks. The table burst into laughter. Customers turned around. Heat climbed into my face. I wanted to disappear. Instead, I smiled. Because owners don't cry in front of customers. When they finally left, they didn't even say good luck. Dad hugged me, then whispered, "You still have time to sell." I stood in the doorway long after they'd driven away, watching the empty street, wondering why strangers believed in me more than the people who'd watched me grow up. That night, I counted the register. $683. Not incredible, not terrible. Enough to survive another day. But I couldn't stop hearing Dad's voice. You still have time to sell. For the first time. I wondered if he was right. I lay awake until almost 4 in the morning, staring at the ceiling of my tiny apartment above the cafe, listening to the old pipes rattle and the refrigerator hum below. What if everyone else was right? What if Morning Ember was nothing more than an expensive mistake? I had no idea that the hardest months of my life were only just beginning, and that my own family was about to make sure of it. If you've never owned a small business, it's hard to explain the kind of exhaustion that settles into your bones. People think you unlock the door, make coffee, collect money, and go home. The reality is that I was the first one there every morning and the last one to leave every night. Most days started at 4:30. Before the sun came up, I was already measuring beans, mixing dough, wiping tables, checking invoices, and praying the espresso machine would make it through another day without breaking. By 7, the first commuters would wander in, still rubbing sleep from their eyes. By noon, I'd already worked what most people considered a full day. Then came inventory, cleaning, payroll, bookkeeping, marketing, ordering supplies, fixing things that weren't supposed to break. Owning Morning Ember wasn't a job. It was my entire life. And somehow, I loved it anyway. Not every moment, but enough of them. There was Mr. Alvarez, a widower who sat by the window every Tuesday morning and quietly worked through crossword puzzles his late wife used to leave unfinished. There was a high school girl named Sophie who ordered the exact same vanilla latte every Friday after chemistry class. She always studied in the corner booth until closing. A young couple had their first date at my cafe. Months later, they came back holding hands. "Can we sit at the same table?" the man asked with a grin. Those little moments reminded me why I'd started this journey. Morning Ember wasn't just selling coffee. It was becoming part of people's lives. But while my customers slowly became my community, my family became my biggest source of stress. Every Sunday, my parents hosted dinner. Skipping wasn't really an option. If I missed one, my mother would spend the next week calling relatives to ask if I was doing okay. So I kept showing up, even when I knew exactly what was waiting for me. One Sunday, I'd barely sat down before Kyle smirked across the table. "So," he carved into his steak without even looking at me. "Still in business?" Dad chuckled. "Barely, I assume." "I'm doing okay." "Okay isn't profitable," Dad replied. "I didn't say I was rich." "You won't be." Silence. I kept eating. Mom smiled in that painfully polite way she always did before saying something that stung. "We're only worried about your future." "I know. You could still apply at your cousin Jennifer's accounting firm." "I don't want to." "Because of the cafe?" "Yes." Dad leaned back. "You're 31, Erica." "I know how old I am." "You should be building a career." "I am." "No." He pointed his fork toward me. "You're playing entrepreneur." The room became very quiet. My aunt glanced down at her plate. No one defended me, not one person. Kyle laughed. "I give it until Christmas." I forced a smile. "You've been saying that since opening day." "Eventually I'll be right." Everyone laughed again, except me. I drove home with tears blurring the road. That night I didn't cry because they'd insulted my business. I cried because, somewhere deep inside me, a tiny voice still wanted my father's approval. I hated that voice. I wished I could silence it. But childhood has a way of echoing into adulthood, no matter how successful you become. Then came February, the slow season. Sales dropped almost 30%. A water pipe burst behind the kitchen wall. Repair bill. $3,000. 2 weeks later. The refrigerator died. Another repair. Then the espresso grinder jammed during the busiest Saturday morning I'd had in weeks. Customers waited. Some left. Others were patient. I smiled through gritted teeth while internally calculating how much money I was losing every minute. That evening, I sat alone on the cafe floor. My apron smelled like coffee and bleach. My hands were raw from scrubbing dishes. I opened my banking app. After paying suppliers, rent, utilities, and repairs, I had less money than I'd started the month with. I stared at the screen for nearly 10 minutes. My stomach twisted into a knot. Maybe Dad had been right. Maybe passion wasn't enough. Maybe dreams really did have expiration dates. The next morning, I walked downstairs anyway, because quitting felt worse than failing. One rainy Tuesday, only 6 customers came in before noon. I recognized every single one. That wasn't a good sign. I was wiping down the pastry case when the bell above the door chimed. Dad. He walked in wearing an expensive navy overcoat, perfectly polished shoes, and the expression of someone inspecting damaged property. He looked around. Empty tables. Quiet room. Rain streaking the windows. He nodded once. As expected. "What brings you here?" I was nearby. He wasn't. His office was across town. He'd come to check on me. Not because he cared, because he wanted confirmation that I'd failed. He ordered a black coffee, paid, sat down, didn't drink it. Instead, he watched. For almost 20 minutes. Every customer who entered, every customer who left, every empty chair. Finally he stood. I'll make you one last offer. I'm not selling. I didn't ask. He slid a business card across the counter. A commercial realtor. I pushed it back. No. You haven't even listened. I don't need to. Erica. His voice softened. It almost sounded kind. There's no shame in admitting this didn't work. It is working. Barely. It'll get better. Hope isn't a business strategy. Neither is humiliation, I wanted to say. Instead, I remained quiet. He picked up the card again. I can have the property sold within 60 days. I'm keeping it. You'll regret that. I already regret letting people convince me my dream wasn't worth chasing. His jaw tightened. For the first time. I'd pushed back. Without raising my voice. Without apologizing. He stared at me for a long second. Then left. The untouched coffee sat on the table until closing. Cold. Exactly like the conversation. A week later, something happened that nearly broke me. A woman I'd never seen before walked in. She ordered a cappuccino. Then she hesitated. Can I ask you something? Of course. Are you Richard Sullivan's daughter? My stomach dropped. I am. Oh. She looked uncomfortable. I'm sorry. Why? I almost didn't come. What do you mean? She lowered her voice. I work with your brother. My chest tightened. He said your cafe was dirty. I froze. He said your food wasn't fresh. I couldn't speak. He said you were desperate for customers. The room suddenly felt much smaller. I wanted to see for myself. And? She looked around. The tables were spotless. Fresh muffins had just come out of the oven. Customers were smiling. This place is wonderful. She looked genuinely embarrassed. I'm sorry someone tried to keep people away. She left a $20 tip. I watched her walk out the door. Then I locked myself in the storage room. My knees gave out. I sat on the floor between boxes of coffee beans. My breathing became uneven. My own brother. He wasn't just laughing behind my back anymore. He was trying to destroy my business. Piece by piece. Customer by customer. I wanted to scream. Instead, I cried. Not loud. Just enough to let the hurt escape. After 10 minutes, I washed my face, fixed my apron, and walked back onto the floor. Mrs. Bennett looked at me carefully. Everything all right, dear? I smiled. It will be. She didn't believe me, but she nodded anyway. That weekend, another family dinner arrived. I almost stayed home. Instead, I went. Halfway through dessert, I finally asked, Kyle. He looked up. What? Have you been telling people not to come to my cafe? He blinked, then laughed. What? I asked you a question. Dad frowned. Where did this come from? A customer told me. Kyle shrugged. I just tell people the truth. What truth? That you'll probably close. You've never even worked there. I don't have to. You told people it was dirty. I said it looked old. You said the food wasn't fresh. I said I wouldn't eat there. Mom interrupted. Let's not argue. No. For the first time in years, I didn't let her smooth things over. I want an answer. Kyle leaned back. You know what your problem is? I waited. You take everything personally. It's personal when my brother tries to ruin my business. Oh, please. He rolled his eyes. If your cafe can be destroyed by one conversation, maybe it isn't a very good cafe. Several relatives chuckled nervously. Dad didn't tell him to stop. He simply looked at me. He's entitled to his opinion. Opinion. That word hit me harder than the lies. Spreading rumors wasn't an opinion. It was sabotage. I stood. I'm leaving. Mom sighed dramatically. There you go again. No. I picked up my coat. I'm done pretending this is normal. Dad crossed his arms. So now we're the villains? I looked around the room. At the people who had watched me be mocked for years, people who had smiled awkwardly instead of speaking up, people who had chosen comfort over courage. No, I said quietly. You made that choice yourselves. I walked out before anyone could stop me. The cold night air hit my face like a bucket of ice water. For the first time in my life, I drove home without looking back in the rearview mirror, because something inside me had finally begun to change. The daughter who spent years begging for her family's approval was slowly disappearing. In her place, someone stronger was beginning to emerge. And within a few weeks, Morning Ember would receive a visitor who would change everything, not because they brought money, but because they saw something in my little coffee shop that no one in my family ever had. The visitor arrived on a Thursday morning. If you'd walked past her on the sidewalk, you probably wouldn't have noticed her. She wore a gray wool coat despite the warming spring weather, carried a weathered leather notebook under one arm, and had silver hair tied into a loose bun. She looked like someone's retired English teacher. She ordered a plain drip coffee. No flavoring, she said with a warm smile. I actually like tasting coffee. I laughed. You'd be surprised how rare that is. She chose the table by the front window and opened her notebook. 3 hours later, she was still there, not bothering anyone, occasionally writing, occasionally staring out the window. When she finally stood to leave, she carried her empty mug back to the counter herself. This place feels... She paused, searching for the right word. Honest. I smiled. That's probably the nicest compliment I've ever received. It wasn't a compliment. She smiled back. It was an observation. Then she left. I assumed I'd never see her again. I was wrong. She came back the next day. And the day after that. By the end of the week, I knew her order before she reached the register. Large black coffee, 1 blueberry scone, no receipt. Her name was Margaret. She never volunteered her last name, and I never asked. One quiet afternoon, she motioned toward the empty chair across from her table. You've been standing for 6 hours. I laughed. Is it that obvious? Sit. I still have work. The work will still be there in 10 minutes. Normally, I would have refused. Instead, I sat. She studied me for a moment. You carry yourself like someone who's waiting for bad news. The words caught me off guard. What makes you say that? You apologize before speaking. I do? You've apologized to 3 customers today. I was being polite. No. She shook her head gently. You were making yourself smaller. I didn't know how to respond. Because she was right. She sipped her coffee. Who taught you that? My family. The answer escaped before I had time to think. She nodded as though she'd expected it. I thought so. I stared into my mug. I keep thinking that, if I work hard enough, they'll finally be proud? I looked up. How did you know? She smiled sadly. Because I spent 30 years trying to earn love from people who had already decided not to give it. Her words settled over me like heavy rain. They laugh at my café. They're afraid of it. I almost laughed. Afraid? Yes. Why would anyone be afraid of a coffee shop? Because every cup you sell proves they were wrong. I blinked. I'd never considered that. Not once. They don't need your business to fail because of money. Margaret continued quietly. They need it to fail because they attached their identity to believing you would. That sentence replayed in my head for days. Every time Dad mocked me. Every time Kyle spread rumors. Every time Mom suggested I quit. Maybe it really wasn't about coffee. Maybe it was about control. A week later, I found out exactly how far that need for control extended. My bean supplier called. Erica. His voice sounded uneasy. I need to ask you something. Sure. Are you closing? No. There was a pause. That's strange. Why? I received a call canceling your standing order. My heart skipped. What? They claimed they were calling on your behalf? I never canceled anything. I figured. My stomach turned cold. Someone had pretended to be me. I thanked him, confirmed the order, and hung up. Then I stood perfectly still behind the counter. Who would do that? The answer arrived almost immediately. I didn't want to believe it. But deep down, I already knew. 3 days later, my answer came. Not from an investigation, not from a confession, from my cousin Emily. She stopped by the cafe after work looking nervous. I shouldn't be here. Why? If my uncle finds out. My father? She nodded. My pulse quickened. Emily lowered her voice. I heard something last weekend. What? Dad, your dad, and Kyle. She looked around to make sure nobody was listening. They were laughing. My chest tightened. They were talking about calling suppliers. Everything inside me went still. What exactly did they say? Emily swallowed. Your dad said, if she won't quit on her own, maybe reality will help her. The room suddenly felt too warm. And Kyle? He said he'd already left fake reviews online. I gripped the edge of the counter. So that explained it. The sudden wave of one-star reviews. Comments from people I'd never served. Claims about rude employees. When I didn't even have employees. Claims about stale pastries baked fresh every morning. I had spent weeks wondering what I'd done wrong. It wasn't me. It had never been me. Someone had been poisoning my reputation. Deliberately. Emily looked guilty. I'm sorry I didn't tell you sooner. You don't owe me an apology. I was afraid. I know. She hesitated. They've convinced themselves they're helping you. I laughed. It wasn't a happy laugh. It was the kind that escaped when something hurt too much for tears. Helping me. The words tasted bitter. Emily reached across the counter and squeezed my hand. They're wrong, Erica. I know. No. She looked directly into my eyes. I mean, they're wrong about you. For reasons I couldn't explain, those 6 words healed something inside me. Because they came from family. Maybe not the loudest member. Maybe not the richest. But someone who chose honesty over comfort. That night, I didn't cry. For the first time in months. I got angry. Not explosive anger. Not revenge movie anger. The quiet kind. The dangerous kind. The kind that clears away doubt. I sat in my apartment above the cafe with my laptop open until nearly 2 in the morning. I read every fake review, one by one. Some mentioned menu items I'd never sold. Others described employees who didn't exist. One review claimed I'd argued with a customer on a Monday. The cafe had been closed that Monday for plumbing repairs. The lies were sloppy. I just hadn't noticed because I'd assumed they were written by real people. I opened another document. Instead of crying, I started collecting evidence, screenshots, dates, supplier emails, security camera footage, customer receipts, everything. Not because I planned to sue anyone, because I was finally done pretending none of this was happening. Margaret noticed the change almost immediately. You've stopped apologizing. I smiled. I have. What happened? I realized something. And that is, I've been fighting the wrong battle. She raised an eyebrow. I kept trying to convince my family that my dream had value. And now, I don't need them to believe in it. She smiled. Good. I'm done asking permission to succeed. She lifted her coffee cup toward me. Now. Now you sound like a business owner. Spring slowly turned into early summer. Tourists began wandering through town. My flower boxes bloomed outside the cafe. The old brick building glowed in the afternoon sun. Business improved. Not dramatically, just steadily. Regulars brought friends. Friends brought coworkers. Customers started posting photos online without asking. One afternoon, Sophie, the high school student who studied every Friday, walked over to the counter. "Can I show you something?" She held out her phone, a short video she'd filmed of latte art, sunlight pouring through the windows, and customers laughing together. She'd posted it the night before. 32,000 views, she said excitedly. I blinked. What? And it's still climbing. By the next morning, it had crossed 100,000. People I'd never met were asking where Morning Ember was. Travel bloggers started messaging. Food pages reposted the video. Someone called the café, asking if we'd allow filming inside. I looked around the room. Nothing had changed. The same squeaky floors, the same mismatched chairs, the same shelves my mother had mocked. But suddenly, people weren't seeing imperfections. They were seeing character. They weren't buying coffee. They were buying the feeling I'd spent years trying to create. And for the first time, I had the unmistakable sense that something much bigger was beginning. I also knew one other thing. If Morning Ember really did become famous, my family's laughter wouldn't last much longer. In fact, they were about to come knocking on my door again. Only this time, they wouldn't be coming to mock me. They'd be coming because they wanted something. And I had already decided that this time, things were going to be very different. The first Saturday after Sophie's video went viral didn't feel real. I unlocked the front door at 6:30 in the morning, expecting the usual handful of early customers. Instead, there were already 15 people waiting outside. At first, I thought they were standing in line for the bakery across the street. Then one of them waved. "Morning, Erica." I recognized her. She'd driven 40 minutes after seeing the video online. Behind her stood a couple from the neighboring county, a group of college students, a retired couple carrying cameras. Someone had even brought a notebook filled with recommendations they'd copied from comments online. I unlocked the door. Within 10 minutes, every table was occupied. By 8 o'clock, there was a line out the door. By noon, the line wrapped halfway down the block. I barely had time to breathe. The espresso machine hissed non-stop. Milk steamed in silver pitchers. Fresh pastries disappeared from the display case faster than I could replace them. People laughed, talked, read books, played board games I'd left on the shelves months earlier, hoping someone might use them. The cafe felt exactly the way I'd always imagined: warm, alive, welcoming. Not because it had become famous, because it had become home to people I'd never met. Around 3 that afternoon, Margaret quietly approached the counter. She waited until I handed off a latte before speaking. "I told you." I smiled. "Told me what?" "They were afraid." I laughed. "I think you're right." She looked toward the line outside. "You didn't build a coffee shop." "What did I build?" "You built a place people were missing without realizing it." Those words stayed with me, because they explained something numbers never could. People weren't lining up for coffee. There were dozens of places to buy coffee. They were lining up for how Morning Ember made them feel. The local newspaper arrived the following Tuesday. A young reporter named Daniel spent nearly 3 hours interviewing customers instead of me. I found that strange. "You don't want to hear my story?" "I do." He smiled. "But your customers are telling it better." He asked people why they kept returning. One woman said the cafe reminded her of her grandmother's kitchen. A firefighter said it was the only place where nobody recognized him and expected anything. A college student said she'd written half her thesis sitting by the front window when the article was published that weekend. The headline read, "The little coffee shop that gave our town its living room back." Not best coffee, not viral cafe, living room. I cried when I read that, because that had been my dream since I was 12 years old. Someone else had finally put it into words. Business exploded. We hired our first employee, then a second, then a baker. For the first time in my life, I wasn't terrified every time rent came due. I repaired the old plumbing, replaced the aging refrigerator, bought a second espresso machine. The squeaky floor stayed. People loved the squeaky floor. The mismatched chairs stayed too. Customers joked that every chair had its own personality. The handmade shelves my mother had criticized became one of the cafe's most photographed features. Funny how flaws become charm once success arrives. Then, exactly as Margaret predicted, my family returned. It happened on a busy Friday morning. The cafe was full. There was a line stretching outside. I looked up from the register and saw my parents walking through the door. Dad stopped. His eyes traveled slowly around the room. Every seat occupied, employees moving confidently, customers smiling, shelves nearly empty because we'd sold so many pastries. He looked, confused, almost offended, as if reality had failed to follow the script he'd written for my life. Mom smiled brightly. Oh, sweetheart. That voice, the same sugary tone she'd used every time she wanted something. She hugged me before I could react. We're so proud of you. I almost laughed. Proud. The word sounded foreign coming from her. Dad looked around again. I have to admit. He nodded once. You've done well. Not. Congratulations. Not. I'm sorry. Just enough praise to avoid admitting he'd been wrong. Kyle wandered behind them wearing designer sunglasses indoors. He removed them dramatically. Wow. He whistled. This place is packed. It usually is now. He smiled. I always knew you'd figure it out. I stared at him. For a second, I honestly wondered if he believed his own lie. I remember supporting you from day one. No, he didn't. But he said it so casually that I realized something. Revisionist history wasn't an accident. It was survival. If they admitted what they'd done, they'd have to admit who they really were. So instead, they rewrote the past. Unfortunately for them, I remembered every word, every laugh, every fake review, every rumor, every lonely night wondering whether I really was foolish. Dad finally cleared his throat. We should talk. I'm working. It'll only take a minute. I looked toward the growing line. Come back after closing. His smile tightened. This is family. So is everyone waiting for coffee? Several customers glanced toward us. I noticed Sophie sitting near the window. Mr. Alvarez looked up from his crossword. Margaret quietly continued reading. Nobody interrupted, but everyone was listening. Dad lowered his voice. Our business has hit a rough patch. There it was. The real reason they'd come? His commercial construction company had dominated the town for decades. I'd heard rumors that rising interest rates and canceled developments had hurt several firms. Apparently, those rumors had been true. We're looking for investors, he continued. I said nothing. You've done very well. Still nothing. We thought perhaps. Mom stepped in. Family could help family. For a long moment, all I could hear was the soft hum of the espresso machine. Steam hissed. Cups clinked together. Outside, more customers joined the line. I looked at the three people who had spent years trying to convince me I was destined to fail. Then I remembered the realtor's card. You still have time to sell. The fake reviews. The canceled supplier order. The laughter on opening day. Dad folded his arms. So? I smiled politely. I hope someone helps you. His expression froze. What does that mean? It means exactly what it sounds like. Kyle frowned. You're seriously saying no? I am. Dad's face darkened. You'd refuse your own family? I met his eyes. The family that tried to destroy my business? Silence. Complete silence. He glanced around. Customers had stopped pretending not to listen. You've misunderstood. No. I shook my head gently. I finally understand. Mom forced a laugh. Oh, Erica, don't exaggerate. I reached beneath the counter. Not dramatically. Calmly. I picked up a folder. Months earlier, I'd printed everything. Supplier emails, screenshots of fake reviews, dates, copies. I placed the folder on the counter. I kept records. Nobody moved. Kyle's confidence vanished first. Dad didn't touch the folder. He knew. Without opening it. He already knew what was inside. You canceled my coffee orders. Silence. You spread rumors. Silence. You left fake reviews. Silence. You told people my food wasn't fresh. Customers exchanged uneasy glances. I wasn't shouting. I didn't need to. The truth was louder than anger. Finally, Dad spoke. We were trying to protect you. I almost smiled. No, I said quietly. You were trying to be right. That sentence hit him harder than anything else could have. Because it was true. Every decision they'd made had been about proving themselves correct. Not protecting me. Not loving me. Winning. They had mistaken cruelty for wisdom. Mom's eyes filled with tears. Can't we move past this? I looked around Morning Ember. The walls I'd painted myself. The shelves I'd built. The customers who had become friends. The employees who depended on this place for their livelihoods. Then I looked back at my parents. I already have. Dad frowned. What? I moved past needing your approval. For the first time in my life, those words didn't hurt to say. They felt freeing. I hope your company survives, I continued. I genuinely do. But I won't invest in people who tried to bankrupt me. Kyle scoffed. So that's it? That's it? We're family. No. I shook my head. Family doesn't celebrate your failures. The cafe became so quiet you could hear milk foaming in the pitcher behind me. Nobody applauded. Nobody cheered. They simply watched. Because everyone recognized what was happening. This wasn't revenge fueled by rage. It was the quiet consequence of years of choices. Dad picked up the folder without opening it. For the first time in my life, he looked smaller than I remembered. Not physically. Emotionally. Without another word, he turned toward the door. Mom hesitated, as if waiting for me to stop them. I didn't. Kyle muttered something under his breath and followed them outside. The bell above the door chimed. Then the cafe filled with ordinary sounds again. Conversations resumed. Someone laughed. The espresso machine hissed. Life moved forward. Exactly as it should. A month later, I heard Dad's company had been sold to pay its debts. Kyle moved to another city for work. We haven't spoken since. Mom sent a birthday card. Inside was a handwritten note. Only one sentence mattered. I should have believed in you sooner. There was no excuse. No justification. Just regret. I never wrote back. Not because I hated her. Because some chapters don't need another page. Margaret still comes in every Thursday. She orders the same black coffee, the same blueberry scone. She always sits by the window. Sometimes we talk. Sometimes we don't. One afternoon, she looked around the crowded cafe and smiled. You know what your revenge really was? I laughed. Saying no? She shook her head. No. She looked at the customers filling every table. Building a life so beautiful that the people who doubted you had to watch it without being part of it. I thought about that for a long time. She was right. Real revenge wasn't humiliating my family. It wasn't making them suffer. It was refusing to let their opinion define the rest of my life. Morning Ember became the most famous coffee shop in town, not because it went viral, not because newspapers wrote about it, but because every person who walked through those doors felt welcome. That's what I'd dreamed about as a little girl. And somehow, that tiny dream turned out to be bigger than all of theirs. If this story reminded you that the best revenge is building a life no one can take from you, Let me know in the comments what you would have done in Erica's place. And if you enjoy stories about justice, betrayal, and ordinary people proving everyone wrong, don't forget to like the video and subscribe. There are plenty more unforgettable stories waiting for you.